Recently, I was streaming the Destiny 2 beta, and someone asked me what was the best part about being a YouTuber. A few people in the chat began yelling things like free games or free trips, and a fellow YouTuber, a good friend of mine named the Jez, commented that the best part was being self-employed. And all of these things are true. But for me, the very best part about being a YouTuber is that I get to share my love of video games with other people who also love video games. And when I say I love video games, I don't just mean I love playing them, I mean I love the art form of the video game, and the design of video games, and the development of video games, and the business of video games, and the personalities behind video games, and the cultural impact of video games. I love all of it. And can I just say that it's pretty rare that I encounter a game that teaches me something new and different about all of these things at once. But that's exactly what happened when I recently downloaded and started playing Warframe, the third-person sci-fi action RPG shooter from developer Digital Extremes. Without question, Warframe is one of the most fascinating games I have ever encountered because of the boldness of its design choices and the technical competence with which it executes on those choices. It's fascinating because of the uniqueness of its visual and sound palette and the way it brings together so many different influences and inspiration and marries them together in such coherent presentation. It's fascinating because it's a studio of 170 people that have produced one of the largest, most feature-rich games I have ever played, where developers literally 8 or 10 times their size achieve far, far less over the same 4-year stretch. It's fascinating because where so many developers are streamlining and dumbing down their games, Warframe retains an uncompromising commitment to depth, diversity, and outright complexity that makes the game infinitely replayable to those that invest the time to understand and appreciate that complexity. And it's fascinating because it's delivered all of this through a free-to-play model that is remarkably fair, providing true value for money for those that choose to spend, and respecting the time and commitment of those that choose not to. I walked into Warframe expecting something average, and what I got instead was something spectacular. It's a game that will only appeal to a certain type of player, but if you are that player, Warframe is almost certain to surprise and delight you. I've tried to find a review that did this game justice in its 2017 state, one that reflects how far this game has come over the last 4 years, and really explained what it felt like to play Warframe. But I couldn't find one, so here I am today, hoping to fill that gap. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review of Warframe. Some 4 years ago, I bought a PlayStation 4. As is typical of most launch machines, there weren't many games available at that time, and most of them were in fact pretty average. For the first time with the release of a new console though, a number of free-to-play games were available at launch, stuff like Blacklight Retribution, or DC Universe Online, or War Thunder. And amidst this rather small list of games was one more, a game called Warframe, a console port of a PC exclusive game from a little known developer called Digital Extremes. I remember installing and playing Warframe back then and immediately writing it off. More than anything else, the game did a terrible job of explaining what it actually was. I ran through levels and killed enemies in one hit, leading me to believe that the combat was absurdly one-dimensional. The tagline for the game was, and still is, ninjas play free, and I was so confused by this because from what I could see, there weren't any damn ninjas. After completing the opening missions, I was essentially just plonked into the middle of a big star map with no idea where to go and no incentive to continue. I logged off, uninstalled the game, and didn't give it a second thought for a long time. Fast forward to last year, I started my YouTube channel, and eventually, because I'm a huge Destiny fan, I started covering Destiny. As soon as I started putting out Destiny videos on my channel, I began to notice a consistent comment coming through on every single one of those Destiny videos, always from different people and always upvoted by many others. It read, "Just play Warframe, it's better and it's free." I'm no stranger to sectarian disagreements in YouTube comment sections, so I didn't really pay much attention to that comment at the time. But as the hype for Destiny 2 began to build and I began to see this comment more and with more and more upvotes every time, I began to notice it. It was as though the popularity of the game was building, even though no one in the mainstream gaming press was talking about it. I began to do some digging around. In the brief research that I did, I learned that Warframe had received over 21 major content updates in that time, as well as literally hundreds of smaller bug fixes and changes along the way. Almost every part of the game has been rebuilt or changed in some way over that time, so clearly there was a developer who cared a lot about their game, and a player base large enough to sustain it. I learned that over 23 million people had downloaded this game since its launch, which was a number comparable to something of that like Destiny, and a few million shy of Overwatch's 30 million. I looked at Steam charts and I was stunned to learn that Warframe was actually consistently one of the top 10 most played games on Steam, which to me was just crazy. At the time of writing this review, more people were playing Warframe on PC than were playing GTA 5. Where Tom Clancy's The Division, which is another game I cover, had 3,000 people playing at that time, Warframe had 40,000. Clearly something was going on here and I was missing out on it. I downloaded it and installed it and got going, and immediately I could see how greatly improved the game was from when I first played it. There was now a proper introductory area. The game's visuals had been overhauled, and when I made it to the star map, I could see just how much map there was to cover. The game was now huge, and I can tell you that I'm now about 70 hours into Warframe, and I've only really progressed through about half of the star map, and I've only really utilized about 10% of the available weapons and armor. Even in those opening few hours of the game, I thought I was wrapping my head around how much content there was to enjoy, but the truth was I wasn't even scratching the surface. There is just so much game here, to the point where I'm literally stunned that a developer only 170 people strong has taken this product that I originally played and made it into this game that now exists in the space of only 4 years. It's staggering how much game there is here, and even more staggering to know that all of it is free if you want it to be. But of course, we can't see and appreciate that bigger picture if we don't understand the basics. So let's spend some time understanding what sort of game Warframe is, so that you'll know whether or not it's something for you. So the biggest question you probably have at this point is, what the hell kind of game is Warframe? And I totally get you, because that was me 2 weeks ago. I don't think I was really able to answer that question either until I was about 20 or 30 hours into the game. Warframe is so weird looking to watch that it can be almost impossible to get a sense of what it is from the outside looking in. So I'm going to spend a moment answering that question in a lot of detail. So let's break it down. Firstly, Warframe is a third-person game. It's exclusively third-person, there is no first-person option, and you really wouldn't want one anyway with a game like this. It's an action game, it's not an RTS or a strategy or a puzzle game or whatever else. The focus here is on constant action. Many people will call it a shooter, but it's not fair to call it a shooter, since there's actually a huge focus on melee combat as well. So there's plenty of shooting if you want there to be, but there's actually plenty of swords and nunchucks and bow staves and all sorts of other melee things if that's your thing. It's entirely up to you how you play. It is a mission-based game, it's not open world, and there's no focus on exploration yet, but we'll come back to that later. Its maps are all procedurally generated. It has a number of set tiles that it combines in different ways, so that almost no two missions are the same. You'll absolutely see familiar areas, but they'll be connected to each other in different ways to always keep things fresh. It's not a story-driven game. It has some rich lore behind it and some really great story-driven quests, but you are not playing this game for the story. You are playing it for the mechanics and for the loot grind. It is an extremely dense and complex RPG. There are an infinite number of build options available to you that allow you to play through the game in whatever playstyle pleases you. It can be played solo very easily, though more complex activities do require a group. And yes, thankfully, there is auto matchmaking for almost all activities. There are no raids like in Destiny or World of Warcraft. The game's endgame does have larger encounters with more players involved, however these are just amped up versions of the same horde style encounters that you're typically facing. There are bosses to kill on regular missions, but they're more like killing a boss in Diablo than they are killing a raid boss in Destiny. It's a looter, but its loot economy is different than what you might expect because of the fact that it's a free to play game. For this reason, you're really looking to grind out as many materials as possible so that you can craft new warframes, weapons, and other items rather than receive those items as drops as you would in other looter games. And yes, it is a free-to-play game. You don't need to spend money to play it, but not spending money means you're going to have to invest a hell of a lot of time into the game to get the same as those that do spend money. This is a really complex topic and I don't want to gloss over it, so we'll come back to this one soon. Finally, it does have a PvP component, but it's absolutely not the focus of this game. It's totally separate from the PvE experience in any way, it has no impact on PvE balancing, and it's really not embraced by the community as a core part of the experience. People will generally tell you that if you're playing Warframe for PvP, then you're probably playing the wrong game. For that reason, I'm not going to be discussing the PvP side of this game in this review. If I was going to be really basic in my description, I'd say that Warframe is the closest thing to third-person Diablo that you're ever going to find. Where Destiny and The Division and Borderlands have elements that make them looters, none of them deliver the same unbridled power and unrelenting loot grind that Diablo does. Diablo is never hard, and neither is Warframe. It's about choosing the right difficulty for you so that you can grind content at a comfortable pace, allowing you to collect loot and use builds that you find interesting. And this is the key point here. Like any other looter, Warframe is ultimately about doing the same thing again and again and again and again. You are always on some procedurally generated map killing waves of aliens. That's it. But the way you choose to do that differs depending on what you choose to bring to the table. In this way, Warframe is absolutely not for everyone. So many people will hate Warframe and games like it because they hate the repetitiveness that is core to any looter. So if you're going to decide whether or not Warframe is for you, you definitely need to accept what it is, because that is not going to change at any point over your Warframe journey. But I don't want to sell it short, because the truth is I've played almost every looter ever released, and I gotta tell you, I've never played a game like Warframe before. So now I want to talk about what makes Warframe so special, and explain how this free-to-play game from a little-known developer has risen to go toe-to-toe with some of the best AAA games on the market today. This is what it feels like after you've spent a few hours in Warframe and you've begun to get a sense of what the game is all about.
I know Kung Fu. Show me.
I thought long and hard about how to explain what Warframe was and the kind of connection you're likely to have with it as a player, but this one moment from The Matrix always stuck out with me as the perfect analogy for what it feels like to really click with Warframe for the first time. Because more than so many other games, Warframe delivers this infinitely broad platform for you to feel like a total badass. It's like you've been playing all of these other games for so long, and all of them have these rules about how games should be or how they should control or what they'll let you do, and then Warframe comes along and just shows you that those rules don't really mean anything and that breaking them is just so much fun. Let me give you an example. In games, movement is power. The more freedom our characters have to move, be that in speed or verticality or whatever, the more powerful they are. For that reason, action games are really careful with the way they dole out movement. They generally want you to be fairly limited on this front because less movement means you have to engage in more combat. Warframe doesn't agree. When you begin Warframe, you'll start by walking, and very soon you'll discover your sprint button. You'll learn to jump, and then you'll learn to double jump, all really standard. Play a little more, and you'll learn to slide, and then at some point, you're going to accidentally press your jump button during a slide, and you'll notice your Warframe will do a little twirl as he jumps forward, crossing huge distance and speeding up as he does this. Huh. Interesting, you think. You'll try that again and you'll notice that it wasn't some fluke, it's actually a core part of the animation framework for the game. So then the experimentation begins. You'll slide and then you'll jump and then you'll double jump to cover even more distance. And as you're floating back down towards the ground, you may aim down sights at an enemy to shoot them, only to discover that doing so slows your descent, allowing you to cover even more distance in a single jump. Put them together and you get this. If movement is power in Warframe, Warframe wants you to be as powerful as possible. It's a design ethos that permeates every single part of the game. Warframe looks at gear and asks, how can we make the player feel as powerful as possible? It looks at the action and asks, how can we make this as relentless as possible? It looks at the RPG systems that underpin your power and asks, how can we make them as flexible and as complex as possible? It looks at level design and asks, how can we make it as diverse as possible? Warframe is constantly looking to empower the player and the player experience on every front. Now, I really hope this review doesn't descend into a really silly Destiny versus Warframe troll fest, as often happens when these two games are mentioned at the same time, but I want to use an example from Destiny to showcase how these two games approach player power. See, Volk is one of the Warframes you can operate in Warframe, and it has the ability to drop a shield that blocks incoming fire. Destiny 2 is due out soon, and its Titan class will now have a similar ability. Drop a shield on the floor in front of you and use it to block fire. But this is what separates Destiny and Warframe. In Destiny, your shield can't move and you can't fire through it. But in Warframe, not only can you fire through the shield, but you can also pick up the shield and carry it around with you. If you've ever played Destiny before, I think the easiest way to describe the feeling of Warframe is to say this. Warframe feels like you're playing Destiny if you constantly had your super up. You constantly feel like a god in Warframe. And while many people will find this dull because it lacks the challenge that many other games demand, just as many people will appreciate the sheer, unadulterated enjoyment of seeing hundreds of enemies melt before them with a single press of a button. And what is so spectacular about this is the flexibility with which Warframe lets you achieve this feeling of power. There are 33 Warframes to choose from, each with their own set of stats and abilities, and more Warframes are released every few months as part of major content updates. There are hundreds of weapons to choose from, and these are not lazy reskins of other weapons. They are each completely different weapons with completely different designs and stats and recoil and sound and reach and whatever else. They are really all truly different in a way that many other games could only hope to achieve. And underpinning all of this is a modding system that allows you to determine how you want to empower your weapons and Warframes. Want to focus on a single shot headshot build? Mod for that. Want to focus on AoE splash damage? Mod for it. Want to focus on speed or reach or status effects or whatever? Just mod for it. If you want your Warframe to be an unstoppable juggernaut or a glass cannon caster, just mod for it. It's entirely up to you at all times. Where so many games these days insult player intelligence by dumbing down their RPG systems. Games like Dragon Age Inquisition or Mass Effect Andromeda or the upcoming Destiny 2, Warframe continues to pile on more complexity. The learning curve isn't for everyone, of course. It's utterly impenetrable at first, and even now there is just so much that I do not understand about how this game really works. But I haven't been this excited to learn about the guts of a game for a long time. I'm constantly researching on the fan wiki and YouTube videos and forums, desperately trying to understand how this beast works so that I can enjoy it more and more. And with each passing day and each new discovery, my appreciation for the game continues to grow. It's a statement to the industry that I hope other developers take note of. Gamers aren't idiots. We don't need our hands held all of the time. Complexity and depth should be embraced, not feared. Digital Extremes gets this, and it's a core design pillar of the Warframe experience. But if there's one thing that might hold people back from giving Warframe a go, it's the fact that it's a free-to-play game, a model that many people have come to outright disregard at this point due to concerns about both the quality of the product and the way that those games often force you to spend money. So let's take a look at how Warframe functions as a free-to-play game and whether or not it's had to make compromises that undermine the core experience. With a few notable exceptions over the years, free-to-play games have generally been either average or pretty bad, which, to be honest, is fairly understandable. Free-to-play games were universally hated by the gaming community at the beginning, except when it came to stuff like MOBAs, and so very few developers would invest in the model and create a quality top-tier product for fear that it would fail. Where most MMOs would go to die, the free-to-play model was synonymous with poor, compromised quality and a bad, overly grinding economy that actively tried to make players' existence as uncomfortable as possible in the hope that they'd spend money to relieve their suffering. But things on this front have been changing. Now, free-to-play games are a lot more common than ever before, and we're generally more willing to give free-to-play games a chance. Still, we as gamers have been burned many times before, and we still hold a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to free-to-play experiences. I was talking about Warframe on Twitter the other day when someone commented something along the lines of, "From what I hear, Warframe is basically like a less polished version of Destiny." And I'm not ashamed to admit that I thought the same thing before having returned to the game, as for me it was inconceivable that a free-to-play game from a medium-sized developer could ever deliver the level of polish that I'd come to expect from modern AAA games development. Man, I have never been so wrong about anything in my life. Let me show you just some of the examples of the incredible level of polish that goes into Warframe. You know how most games give you a sort of shared hub and everyone sort of congregates there to access their missions and the like? Well, in addition to those, Warframe gives you your own personal ship, which is essentially analogous to player housing. And it's not like, there you go, there's your ship. You can customize the hell out of that thing. From the colors, to the decorations, to the orientation of those decorations, to the colors of the decorations that you've just oriented. It's just crazy how detailed you can go with all of that if you want to. You know how most games give you the option to change the color of a piece of armor or a weapon with a skin? Warframe gives you the option to customize almost every single color across any part of your gear, right down to the color of the arrows that you fire. And to be clear, Fashion Frame is totally the endgame of Warframe. You know how some games let you join a clan, which is essentially just a menu screen with people's names on it? Well, Warframe has clans, and they can build giant dojos that are bigger than entire game levels, multi-storied, fully customizable, and they bestow awesome clan benefits like a research lab, allowing you to research and obtain exclusive stuff that you can't get anywhere else. This feature in particular completely blew me away the first time I saw it. And you know how most games have some sort of faction system, which is generally just another menu screen, a progress bar? This is how Warframe does its factions. It has these awesome, incredibly designed faction headquarters that speak to the identity of each of these factions and its leaders. Each of them are intricately detailed and just dripping with personality and intent. It is world building at its finest. There are so many other examples that I could give you that demonstrate how much polish has gone into this game. And look, you cannot look at this level of detail and customization and not recognize how much love and care the developers have poured into this game over the past 4 years. Honestly, if you were coming from any other looter, be it Borderlands or Diablo or Path of Exile or Destiny or The Division or whatever, you will unquestionably be impressed again and again at how many features have made it into this game and how polished each of those features are. If you're at all worried that you are going to get a compromised, lazy, shortcutted gaming experience because this is free to play, then think again. Digital Extremes have some of the hardest working people in the business, obviously, because what exists here in this game at this point is truly industry defining, and honestly, it puts most other game developers to shame. I'm desperately trying to understand how they've accomplished this when so many other AAA developers these days can't push out a product without horrendous bugs, shameless reskin content, or content hidden behind overpriced DLC. Whatever's in the water over at Digital Extremes, I really hope some of the other developers around the world start drinking it. But at what cost have they achieved this? Specifically, what cost to you, the player? Well, monetization is a complex topic, so let me break it down for you as simply as I can. This here is Oberon Prime. He's the latest Prime Warframe released by the developer. He's locked away behind a paywall now because he's new, but in the future, you'll be able to earn him for free if you don't want to spend any money. He was given to me for free by the developers for the purposes of this review, and he's worth about 80 Australian dollars. So I went out and I spent the same amount of money on Warframes and Platinum, which is the premium currency, because it was really important to me that I got a sense of how it felt to spend money in Warframe, so that I was personally assessing the impact of the financial investment as it hit my own pocket. The prime warframes and weapons are in large part the reasons that you play Warframe. They are essentially better versions of existing frames or weapons, having both higher stats and better mod slots. But the non-prime frames and weapons are also worthwhile using and collecting. And the whole point of Warframe really is to collect and level up as many frames and weapons as possible so that you can indulge in increasingly interesting build options. Now I've got to tell you that I think this is perhaps the most grindy game I have ever played, and I've played a lot of really grindy games. Warframe asks you to collect many different types of currencies and materials all at once so that you can continue to craft new frames and weapons at your foundry. And if you aren't up for that grind, then you have two options. Either get these items way more slowly, or pay for them to get them immediately. I will say this though, the speed at which you acquire things doesn't ever really feel unfair because you're constantly able to unlock at least some new weapons or frames based upon the materials and the blueprints that are dropping for you. So while you may be chasing some specific item or warframe or weapon, you'll probably find another blueprint along the way and you just happen to have enough materials to be able to craft that thing. And while you level up that new thing you've just crafted, you'll eventually collect the material for the other thing you initially wanted, and then eventually you get everything. Now, speaking to a lot of Warframe people over the past 3 weeks, people who've played the game way more than I have, the overwhelming feedback I've received from people is that they feel that Warframe strikes a good balance between respecting your time and incentivizing you to pay. They know that as a developer, Digital Extremes needs to make money, so it's expected that they charge you for things, and they make that grind challenging to incentivize you to spend. But no one I've encountered yet has felt that Digital Extremes has got this balance completely wrong, and that the game just isn't rewarding enough if you choose to never spend a dime. I feel I can echo those sentiments. It's always felt really fair for me up to this point, and I'm about 70 hours in. I'll also add, as someone older with a full-time job, I really appreciate the flexibility that the monetization system offers. I'm very time poor, so having the option to skip the grind really appeals to me when I'm busy. However, when I sit down for a big Saturday session on Warframe, aiming to spend 4 or 5 straight hours just farming materials and having fun, I don't want to spend any money then, and I get a huge amount of satisfaction from collecting everything and avoiding spending money altogether. Monetization in any game is always a controversial topic, and I suspect that regardless of how fair I or others judge the system to be, there'll be plenty of others that feel the system is just not to their taste, and they'd rather just pay $60 for a full price game that included everything. And I totally get that, it's totally fair. But I'll only say in response to that Warframe is probably going to pleasantly surprise you rather than disappoint you when it comes to its economy, which is a really rare thing when it comes to most free-to-play games. Earlier when I spoke about me giving Warframe a second go, I left out one important detail. I frequent the games subreddit on Reddit, and one day the top post with a huge amount of upvotes was the announcement that Warframe was going open world with its next big update due in mid-September. Titled The Plains of Eidolon, the update brings a new town area with a never-before-seen aesthetic, new quests, a new weapon crafting system, and of course, a procedurally generated open-world map, something we've never seen before in Warframe. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. This was the announcement that really made me sit up and pay attention, because if this developer was putting in this much work to push forward a game that no one was talking about, then there had to be something there to look at. And there was. There is. There is so much here. I could go on talking about Warframe for hours. I could talk about the random NPC that spawns into certain missions trying to kill you, the weird pet dog thing you can raise to be your personal bloodhound, the strange virus that gets passed from player to player, the annoying robot sidekick that just won't shut up when you're just looking for some peace and quiet, the incredibly well-written lore and story quests, the weird robot drone thing that pumps out drum music when you're fighting, or the Xur-like NPC that rocks up every 2 weeks selling top-tier loot, and the greatest feature of all, the ability to move your ship around when you're on the loading screen. But I won't do that because this review has gone on long enough. There's plenty wrong with Warframe, things that I haven't spoken about here today, but to be honest, they're the sort of minor complaints that I really hate reading in reviews. Things like UI is bad, or mission objectives aren't clear, or whatever. These things don't matter. If you're the kind of player that's going to like Warframe, you're going to like it regardless of its crappy UI. And if you're going to hate Warframe, it's not going to be because of the crappy UI. But regardless of whether or not Warframe is the sort of game you might enjoy, I really urge you just to download it and see it. Because beyond its accomplishments as a looter, it delivers a player power fantasy that is almost unmatched by any other game. It delivers a sense of immediacy and flow that is just so unique and well executed. Its visual design and soundscape is just so strikingly arresting, and the sheer number of features present within the game and how polished each of those features are would lead anyone to assume that this was a AAA game from a developer thousands of people strong, not a free-to-play game from a developer you've never heard of based in London. No, not that London, the other London. There's something special in Warframe that you cannot but respect on some level, and the feeling I have more than any other when I think about it now is, damn, I really wish I had been on this ride from the start. But I'm on it now, and I don't plan on getting off it anytime soon. 70 hours in and my Warframe journey is only beginning, and I'm so excited to find out where it takes me next. That's not something you can say about many other games.